Hello, iSpa family, and welcome to Heart of the Matter, a series which brings together luminaries from a variety of fields and backgrounds for in-depth conversations intended to spark thought, discussion, and inspiration in the spa industry and beyond. I'm Patrick Huey, your iSpa board chairman, and this is a space where we can talk freely about big ideas and issues that matter to us, not only as spa professionals, but also as human beings. We are so fortunate to have today to be joined by one of television's top visionaries, Nicholas Pepper. As president of the legendary television and digital studios, Nicholas Pepper oversees all aspects of television and digital content, including development, business and legal affairs, production, post, finance, marketing, and international. So everything, Nicholas. So prior to joining Legendary in 2018, Nicholas was head of television for 8 years at Mark Gordon Company Studios, where he executive produced numerous series, including The Rookie, Designated Survivor, Quantico, and Criminal Minds Beyond Borders. Nicholas began his television programming career at ABC Network, where as vice president, he oversaw all aspects of the Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning series Desperate Housewives, also Ugly Betty, Lost, and Brothers and Sisters, as well as many other series. Nicholas holds an MFA from the Yale School of Drama and a BA from Lewis and Clark College. So Nicholas, welcome to iSpa.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad you're here. So when we were having conversations about this series, your name came up because I feel like there are so many parts of our business on the spa side and the wellness side that really sort of mirror what happens on the entertainment side. And in your channel and in your career, you've sort of had a 360 view of the entire industry. So I thought, well, we got to have Nicholas come on and talk to our team about his work and sort of what you're doing and how it really relates to us. And I think where I see the real intersection happen, Nicholas, is that you spend a lot of time creating content and developing content that has to appeal to maybe a targeted audience or a broader audience, but your audience is always evolving, it's always changing, the circumstances are always evolving and changing. And so I want to know from your perspective, how within your creative context do you handle that audience that's always shifting and moving, and how do you meet that need within your work?
A light question to start off with. No, I think it's a really interesting conversation. It's kind of fundamentally at the core of what I do with the team of people that works for me. I think, we're in constant kind of conversation internally as a team, but also as human beings in the world, paying attention to what's happening and how people are feeling and what's the mood and tone and texture of the country or the world, or a specific, story that we're talking about. And I think what I've kind of learned as a fundamental principle is that we can't be reactive to where we are in the world today. We have to be predictive, and we have to have the courage of our convictions to create stories that we feel like will be relevant to where we're going. So you can't obviously control it, right? But you can think about it and try to kind of anticipate where the country or society or humanity is really headed to, and then design the story to embrace those elements. So we talk a lot about relevance in storytelling. What makes this story relevant to an audience, and who is that audience that we are trying to target the story towards? And if the relevance feels almost like it has a universal human experience in it, but is still specific, then you kind of feel it in your creative bones that it feels right, and that's where you kind of begin to head and tailor the storytelling, the elements that you're talking about around that kind of central concept. Because the story can be incredibly compelling and fascinating, but if someone turns it on and says, I don't really understand this, or doesn't really feel like it relates to me, then they turn it off and go find something else. And that's the hard part, right? That's our competition. There's so much out there right now. And if you're going to compete, you have to really know what story you're telling to be able to have an audience come to it and stay with it.
So I'm literally like sort of jumping out of my seat because everything you said about where you are in terms of your business is exactly where we are as a spa industry in terms of the big word I think that you use that sort of resonated within me was the word relevance. And how do you stay relevant? How do you stay present and still have an eye on the future? Because we spend a lot of our time, particularly, many people who are going to be watching this are very high level executives within their corporations or within their hotels. And we spend a lot of time in that ideation creative process in terms of what's next, what's the future, with an eye on the future, but also being very sort of situated in what's happening presently in the world. So I think there's something there in terms of really being able to have that duality of focus of that idea of ideation, future, but also being very present and understanding that your market and your capture isn't guaranteed. Like if you do it wrong or you miss it,
Yeah.
audience goes elsewhere. So I think that's a very interesting parallel.
But you also can't be innovative, right? If you're tone deaf to the world that you live in, then how do you innovate on top of what you're doing and on top of what your industry is doing? And then for me, innovation is what makes you stand out from the crowd. Like in the television world, and I feel like in some ways it's probably far less than the spa world, but next year, if everything was going along as it was supposed to, meaning the pre-pandemic plans, there would be over 900 new television shows next year in 2021. If I'm making 2 or 3 of them, how do I get my content to stand out from the crowd? How do I get people to watch it, and not only watch it, meaning sample it, but stay with it and complete it? Because it doesn't matter for us, if someone just watches 15 minutes of a pilot or the first episode of television and then goes away, that's actually a failure. They have to come back and come back and come back and complete the season. That's what success is. So you're always thinking, how am I getting them hooked into the first episode? How am I continuing to keep them hooked into the show? And how do I make it pay off to the place where they want to come back and do it all over again for a second season? And to me, a lot of that is about saying, like, how do I make sure that we are really aware of the world that we live in? And then how do we innovate on top of that? And that obviously is the team we put together, right? So you find innovation through kind of the alchemic connection of the right group of people to execute the show that we're working on. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think you talked about alchemy just now, and you talked about like how do you get the right team together. And I think we spend a lot of time in our industry looking at not only, we sort of look at 2 different levels of teams. You look at your executive team, who is that executive group that's going to come in and help execute, help have the innovation, have the for the forethought of the future. And then we also look at the execution from a guest standpoint, which is our therapists, our receptionist, our reservationist, our attendants, those people who are actually delivering that experience that we in a room sort of sat there and thought it was going to happen, or we see this trend coming. And then we sort of hope there's that alchemy between what happens in the boardroom, what's happening on the floor of the operation in terms of the consumer and the guest experience. And I think there's oftentimes a tension between what happens in that boardroom and what happens on the floor. I guess from you guys going from, in Hollywood, you say the suits come to the set and things all shift. So you kind of have that, you laugh, right? But you know what I mean, you were a suit, Nicholas, so you know what that's like to walk onto a set and have
I've had a suit on for a long time, but I'm still a suit.
So, it's how do you manage that? And in your job as a president of a television studio, you're having to sort of talk to both sides of that, I would imagine, and bring that into harmony.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of, at the end of the day, people think of television as being kind of this, glamorous world of kind of stars and fancy dresses and parties. But in actuality, we're just making a product, right? At the end of the day, we're making something that people get to choose to consume or not. And it's an interesting kind of powerful thing to me personally, because, as opposed to movies where we go to a movie theater and we experience it with an audience around us and then it's over, television is this ongoing process that we experience in kind of the intimacy of our own home. And it has this kind of effect or power on people, I think, fundamentally, to get them to think about how their lives can change, what they do in their life, what they believe, what they don't know that they believe. It can be challenging, it can be comforting, it can be, informative, and all through this kind of veneer of entertainment. And if you can like you said, like find this, for us, it's very similar. There's the team of people that I work with on a daily basis in my company, and then there are the teams of people that I work with on the shows. And if you can kind of find a really clear communicative path on both sides, then you have a really good chance of finding that really special thing that stands out from the crowd, right? But that also is based in a lot of things like trust, and it's based in a safe space where people can feel like they can fail, because through that you find, the truly special moments and things, the truly special story. And if you can really kind of make that happen, then you end up kind of distilling away all of the elements that don't work, and you find the essence of the show, right? You find the essence of what you're trying to do.
So can you talk about, you mentioned trust, which is a big word that comes up in the spa industry. Because you're going into a room with a guest and there's no camera, there are no windows, it's just you and a therapist, and you have to sort of have that instant chemistry, that alchemy, that trust between the therapist and the guest. So in your environment, how are you building that level of trust so that you can create the content that you want to create in a safe space for people?
I mean, I think, there's two types of trust for us. There's the trust in the teams that we create with, meaning the writers, the directors, the showrunners, the artists who create the television programming. There's the trust amongst my team of people who work for me in terms of the executives and the business affairs and marketing and promotion and all the elements that we work with on a daily basis. And in terms of management of people, it's about making people feel respected and heard, and making them feel like they're part of the process and they have something to contribute that's valuable, right? Then there's an even more important trust, which is the trust you have to create with your audience. And so, for TV, it's this really fundamental thing that I think oftentimes bears repeating and reminding ourselves, because I'm sure, like you get so accustomed to your daily life that you forget the fundamentals of what you're doing, right? And fundamentally for television, a TV show needs to feel highly entertaining, which I think sometimes people forget, that sometimes television gets to be really too intelligent for its own good, or it's a little bit too esoteric or out there or whatever. It doesn't have that entertainment factor. It needs to feel like it's relevant to the world that we live in. And then the third thing for me with TV series is that it needs to feel consistent. And that to me is trust. It needs to feel like when you're an audience member and you go watch Designing Women, that in the 5th season, you're getting the same experience that you were getting in the 1st season. That your experience with the show is, as a consumer, is the same thing over and over again, right? So I would imagine with a spa brand, it kind of has that same element of, if you know what you're getting, and you can trust that every time you go there that you're getting the same thing, then it creates a loyalty, it creates a bond, and it creates this kind of safe space to be able to say, like, I'm going to show you myself in my most kind of unique and vulnerable position, and then accept what you have to give to me in this interaction. It's the same thing.
I'm sure that Linda Bloodworth Thomason just loved the shout out. And CBS is dancing right now in their studios. You've worked on some really big shows. You've had really huge successes in your career with shows like Desperate Housewives and Lost and Brothers and Sisters, Quantico, where you are really, I'm going to use this word loosely, managing very high talent, perhaps very challenging talent, who come to the table with their writers of everything they need to work. How when you're in those situations, when you have really large creative responsibilities and you have very, sometimes temperamental, prickly, whatever the word may be, people who are helping to execute that from the talent standpoint, how are you managing that? Because oftentimes in our business on the spa side, we're managing very creative people. I mean, therapists are incredibly creative people. They have to be in order to do the work that they do. And there's so much respect for what they do. And at the same time, there's always sometimes a tension between the therapist and the leadership in their spas. And you have that exact same dynamic on television series. So how are you managing that relationship, which is a key relationship in your business?
Well, talent is talent, right? Like, it doesn't matter what form the talent takes, whether it's visual, it's performative, it's, spiritual. Everyone has the talent. And when you find someone who's truly talented, it takes, I think, an incredible amount of strength and character and risk to show your talent, right? So what's interesting is that I used to be an actor. So having done that for a long period of time and seeing the world from that point of view, I feel fortunate enough to have a sense of what the artist feels. And while it's been many years, I think that empathetic quality is still there. And what I remember wanting as an artist was someone to be clear in the establishment of how to communicate. That if I felt safe in the way I could express myself, both on stage, but also to the people I was working with, then it brought up my best work, right? So I carried that kind of sense of communication and a philosophy behind communication into the work that I do now. And certainly on every show that I've worked on, there's never been anyone who's been difficult whatsoever. Everyone's been just dreamy, angelic to deal with.
Never, ever. Don't believe the Inquirer.
But I think what I found really early on was a couple of pieces of advice from people I greatly admire. The first one was, understand that you're their boss, not their friend. So with stars specifically, I believe the quote was, how great it is to have that person show up to your birthday party or your holiday party, because everyone loves a star at a party. You still have to deal with them for the other 360 plus days a year. And maybe that one day, that one experience is not as meaningful as you think it is, given the kind of the inability to clearly communicate from that point on, right? Because the lines get drawn in a different way. I also, fundamentally, when I enter into a work environment or an agreement with an artist of some kind, I actually generally will sit down and say, how do you like to work? Who are you? What do you like? Do you like people to be direct? Do you like people to soft play things? Do you like people to talk to your agents or your managers or your lawyers? I mean, I kind of, I think fairly flippantly, and I don't mean it this way, but specifically with on-camera talent, we'll sit down with an actor and say, do you want to be treated like an actor or a normal person? Because an actor means you go to their representatives to have conversations, and then the representative talks to them, and there's no real communication. A normal person means I go to them and say, listen, you were an hour late to set. There are 300 people waiting here whose livelihoods depend on you being on time. To get through this, we need to partner in the right way. And I need to be able to come to you and say, you got to show up for work on time. And if you don't show up for work on time, it only hurts you in the long run and all these people. So it really starts with being able to have the courage of your convictions and to strip away all the artifice and all of the fear and all of the status, and just simply say, no matter if you're an Oscar winner or an unknown person, what works best for you? And then let's try to meet there first. Does that make sense?
Nicholas, I mean, you're talking to my soul right now. No, because I think because what you're saying, and I think it's so, what I'm really hearing you say is that you're very proactive in your relationships with your talent, because as the leader, as the network exec or the content creator or the writer or the producer, you are responsible for the relationship with the team, whether it's the showrunner or the actor or whomever is on that set. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's, you kind of distilled what we spend years and years learning in management school, is to take responsibility for your relationships in your spa, on your TV show, in your office. Something that you also said, and you kind of just threw it away, I don't know if you realized you said it, was the idea of empathy, that because you were an actor and you understand what it's like, the vulnerability of an actor's life, that it makes you very empathetic to them in this role that you're currently in. And I think, Dan Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, where he talks about the base of emotional intelligence is empathy and optimism. So I love that you said that, because I think oftentimes we get caught in our roles and we kind of forget to see or walk through the experience of the other person. And this stuff sounds so trite and so sort of fundamental, but it's all about the fundamentals, especially now.
Well, it's also, I mean, there's a wonderful, I think it's a TED Talk from Brene Brown on vulnerability as well. And I think like empathy, optimism, and vulnerability are really the three core tenets of human connection. And if you can really honestly live in those three things, not in a fake way, in a way that you really take it in, then you create, you create a space where people can feel the same way, especially if you're the leader, right? And like, ultimately, one of the big things that I communicate to people I work with a lot is that I'm not doing this to make someone a star. I'm not doing this to necessarily make money. I'm not doing this for an award. I'm fundamentally and solely focused on creating the most compelling, dynamic, entertaining story we possibly can. I'm always going to do what's best for the television show in total, not for a person. So of course you have to balance the business aspect, the P&L of everything. You have to understand the ramifications of your conversations, of your actions. But very clearly, this becomes about one central idea that everyone can learn or understand they're part of, and then get together and get behind to make, right? And I think oftentimes with people, if they understand what your objective is, if they understand what you're actually trying to do, and you can kind of boil it down to a very clear, concise, applicable concept, that no matter if you're the guy who's carrying the cable around set, or the movie star, or the driver, or the marketing executive, if they can really all be a part of that, then it's an easier thing, right? And look, I'll also honestly say, like, didn't go to management school, but I'm incredibly conflict adverse. I hate fighting. I don't mind arguing. I don't mind the creative, discourse and pushing and pulling an idea or a concept or dialogue or whatever. But I don't like it when someone is upset or I'm upset and you have to deal with that. Because to me, that's fundamentally antithetical to the process of creation, which is about actually making something. That to me is about tearing something down, right? So all of my kind of philosophies actually come from my own psychology of saying, okay, I don't want to deal with someone who's angry, so I'm going to get ahead of them in this process to say, here's how this works here. Here's what's expected of you. Here's your responsibilities as part of this. And if you can do that, then great, let's go. And if you can't, then we have a problem and we need to deal with it now before it becomes a real problem. It's just, it's a way to save my soul and my psyche through, I think, what can be quite a topsy-turvy world.
Well, yeah, I think we're all living through a topsy-turvy world right now. And I always ask, as we come to the conclusion of these conversations, I always want to know, what do you think is the lesson in all of this that we're going through right now?
In coronavirus and the pandemic and the social upheaval and all of these elements that are coming forward, I think that the lesson to me is be present and be grateful, and to really examine why I'm grateful for things, what I'm grateful for, and to live in that gratefulness in the right way. I think all of us needed maybe a moment to redefine ourselves, our lives, and for better or for worse, this is forcing the entire population of entire human population to really take a look and to kind of be truthful with themselves. And maybe it's just time to be truthful.
Yeah, that idea of gratitude and is key. Wow. You kind of floored me there a little bit, Nick. I'm taking it in, man. I'm not kidding you. Like, that's, well, Nicholas, we could go on for like 2 hours because we talk like that and you have so much great wisdom. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for taking time with myself and our iSpa family and the spa world today, and for sharing your story and your wisdom with our communities. To everyone who's watching, thank you for joining us as well. And keep an eye on the iSpa social media channels and experienceispa.com for details about upcoming installments of our Heart of the Matter series, as well as other virtual offerings and spa reopening resources and stay opening resources. So everyone, stay well, stay safe, and have a blessed and beautiful day. Thank you, guys.